So I'd like to think everybody's waiting around for me. I know you're actually waiting around for the GS5. So unlike Brian's presentation and Sudharma's presentation, I'm going to give you a much broader overview. I'm not going to drill down too deep, but really provide you an overall view of the state of mobile security. So without further ado, so the things we'll talk about are the mobile ecosystem as a whole, talk about some assets that are associated with the mobile ecosystem, those threats that affect the environment, controls within this space, and finally some security awareness at the end. Okay, so the mobile ecosystem is very complex. I want to give you guys a little bit of perspective on what the mobile ecosystem looks like. It starts with the consumers. We've got many different types of consumers. I added machines on the bottom. That typically aligns to enterprises, but it shows that there's a different purpose behind it. Well, those consumers align to a mobile network operator. You're familiar with these, T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and so on. Here's an example of some of the largest mobile operators within the US. What's important to understand here is that each of these mobile operators have different implementations, different services that they provide, different configurations for their technologies. And each of these unique environments and unique configurations add to the complexity of this environment. You've got device manufacturers. You're very familiar with these. All of you have one of these devices in your pocket. Is there anyone who doesn't have one of these devices? So pretty standard. These are some of the top 10 manufacturers within the US. And I would expect that the vast majority of you have an Android device. So here we've got chipset manufacturers and the operating system vendors. Apple, you've got Android from Google, you've got Windows, you've got BlackBerry, Nokia, and several others. Again, each of these add to the complexity of the mobile ecosystem. You got the application developers. We had a couple people earlier raise your hand saying that you're a developer. Well, in the past, the developers provided access to those applications directly to the consumer. With the mobile environment, one of the things that they've done is they've made these application marketplaces. So iTunes or Google Play environment or Amazon has their own marketplace as well. And then you've got value-added service providers. So this provides a broader view of what that mobile ecosystem looks like. Now what's interesting about this is each of these introduce opportunity and additional capability for you as the consumer, but each of these also introduce additional risk or the opportunity for risk. So now let's talk about the device. So the GS5, this is what you're all hoping to get, right? So it looks fairly simple. Well, let's break it down. So GS5, this is actually the device you're going to be getting today. So I hope next time you'll be able to bring it back in the fully configured position. So this is what GS5 looks like when it's broken down. Looks a little complex, but not all that much. There's some major components there. Now let's take it down a step further. Wow, this is what the circuit board looks like and all of the different circuits that are located on a GS5. You look through this list and there's probably names there that you guys have never heard of. So who's heard of SD Microelectronics or Maxim? Not the magazine, the circuit company. So not very common. We have a couple of people raising their hand. Thing is we're talking about 12 chipset manufacturers with this one device. Each one of those introduce opportunity for vulnerabilities to be discovered. The question is what are their development practices for each of those chipset manufacturers? Are they following good development practices? When a vulnerability is discovered, how do you, as the end user, get notified that there was a vulnerability in the GPS? So this is extremely complex. These devices today do so many different things, numerous radios, all of these different components. In fact, on this GS5, there's a heart biosensor. So we continue to advance these technologies and bring about new capabilities, but each one of those capabilities can also bring about some risk. So let's talk about the asset. So we saw the phone and what the phone looks like. Well, what about what's on the inside of that phone? You got stored data content. You know, not only do you have contacts and pictures, you've got information that you may have received from your corporate environment on that device. Could be intellectual property, highly sensitive material. Or it could just be that game that you've been playing for weeks at a time and you've got a high score saved, and if that gets lost, you're out weeks of effort. So may not be all that significant compared to corporate intellectual property. You know, many different assets here, things like the UICC, or the, UICC card, so the SIM card. Each of these, again, bring about additional opportunity for risk. So mobile money. Long time ago, this was mobile money, right? So silver has been around for a long time. Well, nowadays, again, we got this device. This is acting as mobile money as in sorts. Now, let's do a comparison between these two. So the latest report showed that silver, 1 ounce of silver was about 18 bucks. So this GS5 that we're going to be giving away today is around 660 bucks. You add on taxes and you're over $700. It's only about 5 times the weight of that one piece of silver. That GS5 now is equal to about 35 ounces of silver. So when you see a mobile device sitting somewhere, you can imagine a nice pile of silver sitting there. No wonder why people are stealing these devices, not only for the value of the device itself, but the value for the content that could be located within it. So what are some of the threats involved in the mobile space? It's a scary world out there. So all kinds of doom and gloom. We'll get to some of the good stuff in a little bit, but there's a lot of threats. These are some examples of threats to the mobile device. Got some on the device, got some with the back-end communication between the device and the network, and then you got the back-end system. So the items that are listed on the top left-hand side, I believe there's about 10 or so, those actually come from OWASP. We got a whole bunch of others. Brian, I believe, covered some of the OWASP top 10. As a developer, you need to be focusing on all of these. As a security professional, you need to be thinking about them. Simple things like rooting or jailbreaking, you might not think are all that critical, but when you do that, you're subverting security controls that the carrier or the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM, has intentionally put in place so that that device remains secure, so that you have a good user experience. So rooting a device, it's a great way to get additional functionality. I was talking to an individual on my team, Yusuf, who had just recently rooted a GS4 for good reason. He wanted to do some packet captures associated with it. So there's capabilities that can come along with this, but if you're not familiar with the risk that you're moving into when you do those kind of things, you may be in for some long nights or painful experience with some loss. So denial of service attacks against the device. We've seen a great deal of denial of service attacks against the infrastructure, right? We've seen organizations like eBay and media sites and financial institutions get hit really hard by denial of service. Well, what about that mobile device? You guys are all highly dependent upon these devices, right? I'm surprised nobody has their phone out right now and are actually looking at something at this point. If you lose your mobile device for 5 minutes, for 2 minutes, for 30 seconds when you really need it, that's a critical impact, right? Denial of service to not only the device, to the network, to that communication channel is critical. As a carrier, we have to think about things like 911. Most of you are focused on, okay, I've got some sensitive contact or content, I need to make a phone call, let my wife know that I'm going to be home late. Well, what if it's an emergency call that you need to make? So denial of service is not just impactful to an individual, not only impactful to an organization, but it could be life-threatening. So these are some of the threats that we think about as a carrier, someone in the mobile ecosystem. You've got threats associated with communication. So is that communication secure? Can someone stand up a rogue access point and basically present themselves as a man in the middle and gain access to that communication. So who's familiar with GSM? So most everyone, I would expect. So GSM is somewhat of a legacy communication architecture protocol that has been used throughout the world globally. Unfortunately, with GSM, it does not do mutual authentication between the device and the network. And because of that, it allows fairly easy opportunity for someone to stand up, act as a man in the middle, or monkey in the middle, and in turn, observe that communication. Even if that communication is encrypted between the device and the network, that monkey in the middle can in turn degrade or reduce the authentication, or I'm sorry, the encryption requirements for that communication. So some of you may have heard of A53 or A51, the suite of encryption protocols used for communication. Well, an attacker at this point can actually reduce it so that there's no encryption required whatsoever. So there's a lot of threats not only associated with the device, but that communication channel. What happens when that device goes off network? It's not using that carrier network. It's using Wi-Fi. So as a carrier, we lose some of the capabilities that we have to protect that communication. And then, of course, there's always threats against the back end. Not just NSA, but there's other guys out there who want to gain access to our environment and the information that we may actually have within T-Mobile. So somewhat of a visual depiction of some threats that I talked about. I wanted to show this because this provides a little bit more perspective on some of the different players involved in the ecosystem and the extent at which there's risk out there. And each of these can be a source for an attack. Okay, so do a quick survey. So raise your hand if you've lost your phone and were not able to recover it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? Lost your phone and actually recovered it. So I've lost my phone in my car, in the couch, all over the place in the past. So I've been able to recover it several times. Lost your phone, actually had your phone stolen and were able to recover it. I'm sorry, not able to recover it. So we got 2. Okay, 2. This is a very scientific survey, you can tell. So who's had their phone stolen and actually were able to recover it? Okay, so 2, again, okay. So the reason why I asked this is because there's an awful lot of talk about kill switch, or what we refer to in the mobile industry as device lock, and what we can do to minimize the risk to lost or stolen devices. A company called Lookout, who's familiar with Lookout? Okay, so T-Mobile includes Lookout for all of our Android devices. It is a mobile endpoint management or endpoint security solution. They've stated that 1 out of 10 smartphone users are victims of mobile theft, of phone theft. So we had 4 individuals total, which actually pretty much equates out to about 10%. So that's pretty spot on, I guess, at least for having phones stolen. A lot more people lose their phone, especially me. So Consumer Reports has recently stated that as of last year, 3.1 million devices were stolen within the US. So, you know, that's a pretty big issue. These phones, as we've seen, are very expensive. They've got highly valuable content on there. It could impact an individual, a corporation. So what can we do about that? Well, preventing phone theft first starts with you as the individual, as the consumer. One of the first things that you can do is, if you're using an iPhone or an Android device, is you can leverage the capabilities that they have built into those devices. So iPhone, there's the Find My iPhone application where it works very similarly to Android Device Manager. You just log in with your credentials. I believe it's your iCloud credentials, or for Android, it's your Google account that you have associated with your device. And there's all kinds of great things that you can do. You can have your phone scream really loud in case you lost it in the couch or in your car or somewhere, so you can actually find it. You can set your phone to lock. You can actually wipe your device if you don't believe you're going to be able to recover it at all. If you left it in the back of the taxi or at Starbucks as you started pulling away and you don't believe you'll be able to get it again. What's interesting when it comes to mobile phone theft is there's some additional over-the-top applications. Like Lookout has a mobile device management type capability where, in addition to these things, they can do things like actually taking a picture of the person who's trying to unlock the device and having it sent back to Lookout, so you can see that person who just stole your phone and see if there's someone you know, or you can hand that information over to the police. So pretty interesting where we've come as an industry for this. So if trying